Joining me now to break this all down is NBC News White House correspondent, NBC's Gilchrist. Aaron, so good to see you. So talk about how this interview came together. It's not often that President Biden sits down to talk with Howard Stern.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You referenced him as a shock jock. That is a label that he has had for many, many years. And it seems a bit unusual that President Biden would sit down to have a conversation that was, we think, about an hour or so long with Howard Stern. But that happened. And it really is consistent, I think, Kristen, with what we've been seeing from the Biden campaign, particularly over the last several months. The campaign has leaned into this idea that it needs to try to talk to people to potential voters in slightly unconventional spaces. We obviously have seen a flurry of ads come out in the last couple of months from the campaign, but President Biden has been going to a lot of smaller events, smaller gatherings with supporters. He's been able to do a ton of local radio interviews, some local TV interviews as well. He's done some Spanish language television interviews as well. And so the campaign is really trying to turn to these spaces that maybe don't have a massive national footprint potential, but these spaces where the president can speak to specific groups of people at different points in time and try to paint a picture about what he's done and what he wants to do in the future, in hopes that that will drive people to the polls in November and help to bolster his chances at winning re-election, Kristen.
You know, Aaron, it's interesting. You referenced the polls. Obviously, in a lot of polling, which is very narrow, we have seen former President Trump leading President Biden. That gap has been narrowing, of course, including in some battleground states. But there's actually some new reporting that privately President Biden has been pretty confident about his chances in November. Tell us about those conversations.
Yeah, three sources familiar with some of the president's comments have told NBC News that President Biden privately expressed confidence that he is going to win in November, partly buoyed by the polling that you suggested. The president, we've heard the president himself speak several times in the last couple of weeks, in particular at campaign events, these smaller events, saying that the polling has shown that he is winning in some polls, more polls, and that he's tied in other polls. He feels as though the progress is being made. Our own NBC News poll the last week or so did show the president moving up in the polls a bit. We've also, from sources, come to understand that the president is also buoyed by the fact that there have been so many campaign offices opened around the country in the last couple of weeks. There have been so many more staffers hired, hundreds of them. And the president, according to some of these sources, has felt good about the fact that these small dollar donations seem to be increasing. We know he's had almost a $200 million war chest that he's been able to use to run this campaign, Kristen.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And he has been hitting the campaign trail with a more robust pace, shall we say. Yeah. Let me turn to a very different topic, Aaron. I want to ask you about this U.S. assessment that 3 IDF battalions were credibly implicated in human rights violations in the West Bank. Now, this happened before October 7th, but what is the White House saying, and how might this impact military aid?
Well, honestly, the White House is saying talk to the State Department. And to that end, our team at the State Department has been able to learn, as you noted, Kristen, that there are these 3 Israeli battalions that were implicated in these human rights violations against Palestinians in the West Bank prior to October 7th, and that the State Department has been reviewing some of these activities. And it's also been reviewing what the Israelis have been doing and what they're planning to do in terms of remedying some of the concerns that the U.S. has presented. And as a result of that, military aid will continue to flow to these two of the 3 IDF battalions that were referenced here, and the 3rd is still being reviewed. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, was asked about this at the White House earlier this week, and he said that President Biden would not be intervening, would not be getting involved in what he described as a State Department analysis with a State Department outcome. And so the position from the White House at this point, anyway, seems to be that they're going to let the career diplomats, the career folks at the State Department, continue with their analysis and ultimately make the decision about what outcomes result from that and how these Israeli battalions might be impacted, Kristen.
All right, Gilchrist. Aaron, thank you so much for your great reporting, covering all the angles for us.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.